things become more serious. In this painting, there's definitely Arnold Cachada as a young man, Walter Sisulu. And it's the start of a small struggling law practice that was to confront the juggernaut of the state. To me, one of the most profound paintings in the series is this linchpin of when the young black lawyer says no to a white person who's no doubt part of the state security system. There's this malevolent fellow in the doorway, scary times. In this painting, the might of the state, the military and the police force all starting to become major factors in Nelson Mandela's life, and he has to flee. He became a fugitive in his own land, which culminated in what happened in the next painting. The next painting is of the famous capture site. Mandela was apprehended by the state security. As soon as he saw their cars, he knew what type they were, and he realized that the game was up. He was taken into custody, and finally the fateful day when he made the greatest speech in the history of our country was set. And so the painting is really at that point where everyone turns and look up at him as they realize that they're in the presence of a completely remarkable human being. Paintings 9 and 10 are about the Robben Island years. It must have been heartbreaking sitting there in his cell night after night. He labored in the quarries under the watchful eyes of sometimes very cruel people. There were these achingly long periods of time where nothing was pleasant and nothing was happy. The next painting is the meeting between F.W. de Klerk and Nelson Mandela, two people from such different backgrounds with such different pressures on them could see that it was important to talk and move forward together. And the next painting is perhaps the visual centerpiece of the collection, the official state portrait. John was asked to paint Nelson Mandela in his offices in the Union buildings, and so John spent a good deal of time with Nelson Mandela, and it does reflect a man at the height of his powers. The whole world fell in love with Nelson Mandela, and many of the greatest leaders, such as Bill Clinton, came to see him and spent time with him. And John has put them at their ease in amongst the old oaks of Cape Town, and I think he's captured the aura of both men beautifully. That famous ride with the Queen in the gilded carriage, simply extraordinary that he can go from being a little boy running down the path and ends up escorting the Queen. And so, finally, the curtain draws down in one of the most extraordinary political careers, and the youth become the most important part of his life. So many children saw Nelson Mandela as their grandfather of this nation. So finally, the last painting, so similar in many ways to the first, the same path that three happy young boys ran down with their dog at the beginning. Now, as an old man walking off to the sunset, now his personal journey on this world was over soon. The true brilliance of John Mayer was that he took this very profound last few days of Mandela's life and converted it into the final few lines of this wonderful long poem he painted over the course of 2 years.
Firstly, good afternoon, John Mayer. My name is Dr. Jamal, and I'd like to say it's a great pleasure to be discussing a monumental achievement on your part, your great suite of paintings on the life journey of Nelson Mandela.
For me, this was also an honor. Thank you.
I'd like to ask you how you came about doing this suite of paintings and what was the initial trigger?
I was sort of pulled into this by a client who came to me and said, I want you to do a series for me. He sparked it off, and it gave me an opportunity to go back into my memories about several times that I met Mandela when I spoke to him when he said to me all those years ago. It was in the first year of his presidency, and I was expecting quite a difference. When somebody's a legend like that, my hand would shake when I was painting. But in fact, he was almost too humble. You know, I thought, why is he so humble in my presence? But that is just the nature of the man. You know, he was exceedingly polite, and I was astounded.
So the nature of painting Nelson Mandela, could you talk about that? What do you think drew you towards him as a man, as a figure, as a myth?
One thing that I discovered, because I've done lots of portrait painting, and I think what happens when people are having their portrait painted, they almost unconsciously want to portray themselves, because they're hoping that this will be reflected in the portrait. So a very personal conversation is struck, and somehow it gets into the picture and it's locked away.
Well, the man was so incredibly transparent, so humane, so giving. That must have been incredibly, forgive me, easy to capture him.
Actually, it wasn't easy, because I wasn't looking for anything initially, beyond the icon. And then I realized that there was a lot more complex, deeper in that he was conveying initially.
So, John, this is the other thing. I mean, I'm looking at the works. In fact, there's such an incredible spectrum in terms of expressions and stories of Mandela's life that you capture. Can you talk about that?
Yes, well, of course, it does cover an entire spectrum. One must remember with all these things, and a lot of these things I had to invent. You know, I only invented when he was elderly. But what did he look like when he was 25 or when he was 35? People don't know this.
I find that very intriguing because painting for you, it's a dream tool. It's a way of seeing and imagining and telling a story. So there's a direct tool eye in the choices you make.
I've always been a great fan of cinema, and I think some of the best art around is cinematography. So that's always been an enormous influence on me. And so it's almost like I'm trying to paint a movie sequence, and that's what I wanted it to be. I always wanted my paintings to look like the great cinematographer made. There are so many pictures of Nelson Mandela paintings and sculptures and things like that, and I want my series to be one of the handful that moves people.
Well, they certainly do. But I want to thank you again for a wonderful conversation. I hope it's been as productive for you as it has for myself.
It's been nice because it gives me a chance to find meaning.
Hello, Carolyn. I'm so glad to speak to you because you represent R&B organizing that.
Essentially, at R&B feel very privileged to be able to share this series. And our hope is it becomes digitally accessible way beyond our client base. R&B since the early days, in fact going back to the founders, we believed in our business philosophy that creativity is able to exude all sorts of positivity and also communicate. Now in this particular case, the visual arts is communicating Mandela's life journey. And we do believe that collaboration with SOCA is all about celebrating the limitless possibilities of art.
Circuit Gallery in Rosebank, Johannesburg, to see a monumental exhibition of works by John Meyer on life and talents So, can you tell me from your perspective why it matters to you so much?
I think up front I have to state that even though John Bird is a realist with an international reputation, this was the bravest possible project that he could have undertaken. Painting 16 huge pictures, they are large, of the life of the greatest icon of our country, and this could have gone so badly wrong. It could have been a trite, embarrassing statement. And what have we? We've got a series of 16 pictures that render many speechless and put many to tears. The story starts, as it always does, with the story of a person with youth. So the first painting is an undeniably great landscape by John Mayer. The painting is of a carefree bunch of boys with no thought in the forefront figure of what a part he was to play in the evolution of contemporary South Africa. The next painting is the first of the monochromatic paintings. The young Madiba has arrived in Johannesburg and is talking to a woman. Who that woman is not known. That is the case with much of John's work. The people surrounding Madiba are hinted at, but it's a picture which shows his love of life, and he's just enjoying himself in the company of effervescent young South Africans. The next painting is of Nelson Mandela in a boxing hall. Not as the boxer, I do think the victor looks a little bit like Madiba. The fallen, I think, looks like that great photograph of Sonny Liston being beaten by Cassius Clay, who became Muhammad Ali, and there is Nelson Mandela at the ringside. The next painting is where things become more serious. And this painting is definitely on Katrala's young man, Walter Sisulu. And it's the start of a small struggling law practice that was to confront the juggernaut of the state. To me, one of the most profound paintings in the series is this linchpin of when a young black lawyer says no to a white person who's no doubt part of the state security system. There's this malevolent fellow in the doorway, scary times. In this painting, the might of the state, the military and the police force all starting to become major factors in Nelson Mandela's life, and he has to flee. He became a fugitive in his own land, which culminated in what happened in the next painting. The next painting is of the famous capture site. Madiba was apprehended by the state security. As soon as he saw their cars, he knew what type they were, and he realized that the game was up. He was taken into custody, and finally the fateful day when he made the greatest speech in the history of our country was set. And so the painting is really at that point where everyone turns and look up at him as they realize that they're in the presence of a completely remarkable human being. Paintings 9 and 10 are about the Robben Island years. It must have been heartbreaking sitting there in his cell night after night. He labored in the quarries under the watchful eyes of sometimes very cruel people. There were these achingly long periods of time where nothing was pleasant and nothing was happy. The next painting is the meeting between F.W. de Klerk and Nelson Mandela, two people from such different backgrounds with such different pressures on them could see that it was important to talk and move forward together. And the next painting is perhaps the visual centerpiece of the collection, the official state portrait. John was asked to paint Nelson Mandela in his offices in the Union buildings, and so John spent a good deal of time with Nelson Mandela, and it does reflect a man at the height of his powers. The whole world fell in love with Nelson Mandela, and many of the greatest leaders, such as Bill Clinton, came to see him and spent time with him. John has put them at their ease in amongst the old oaks of Cape Town, and I think he's captured the aura of both men beautifully. That famous ride with the Queen in the gilded carriage, simply extraordinary that he can go from being a little boy running down the path and ends up escorting the Queen. And so, finally, the curtain draws down on one of the most extraordinary political careers, and the youth became the most important part of his life. So many children saw Nelson Mandela as their grandfather of this nation. So finally, the last painting, so similar in many ways to the first, the same path that three happy young boys ran down with their dog at the beginning, now as an old man walking off to the sunset. Now his personal journey on this world was over. So the true brilliance of John Mayer was that he took this very profound last few days of Mandela's life and converted it into the final few lines of this wonderful long poem painted over the course of 2 years.
My name is Fatima, and I'd like to say it's a great pleasure to be discussing a life's journey of Nelson Mandela.
For me, this was a thank you.
I'd like to ask you how you came about doing this suite of paintings and what was the initial trigger?
I was sort of pulled